I think we're about halfway through this foundational series. So far, I've laid out, matter-of-factly, some simple truths, tenets, and logic that collectively may not only be controversial to both religious conservatives and progressive liberals, but they also discredit much of academia's philosophical and deterministic arguments for moral nihilism and collectivism. And by now, you're probably beginning to understand that these concepts are not being taught in schools, they're not discussed in politics, they're not preached in churches, and they're not covered by the media. And there's a reason for that. And those reasons will become more obvious in chapters to come. And those reasons are not derived from conspiracy theories, generational wisdom, or government strategy. Those reasons are a product of reality, human nature, and our environment. It is unfortunate that in today's society, there are people out there who would actively shame us for acknowledging reality. And to add insult to injury, we've been living in a society that gaslights people into thinking that opinions hold the same weight as objective fact, that feelings hold the same weight as logic. They do not. This ignorance war on reality is real, and it's hurting everybody. But I will argue it is a war we must win. And today, as a species, we are losing the battle. Now, I have given the followers of this series time to evaluate the data, challenge the logic, and scrutinize the concepts. But it should be clear by this point in the series, society is not asking or tackling the right question. What if your moral instincts, your political beliefs, your sense of justice, even your anger, are not chosen the way you think they are? What if they're mostly a product of biology, incentives, the environment, and selection? And what if, and this is a biggie, what if the systems we build are literally breeding future generations of people? Not metaphorically, biologically, psychologically, culturally. That's what we're about to answer in the second part of this series. So with that, let's get started. Let's start with reality. I'm going to tell you something that should already be clear, and that is, there is only one objective reality. It exists as is, whether we like it or not. It operates on natural laws, on deterministic laws, independent of human perception, belief, or cultural narratives. Reality is not a social construct, and perception is not reality. Perception is subject to people's interpretations, which are distorted by cognitive biases, psychological conditioning, and social influences. That's why two people can witness the same event and walk away with completely different conclusions. But their interpretations don't change the truth, nor does it change the reality of what happened. We know that human beings are not born as blank slates. As they grow, they do not choose what they believe. Their beliefs, your beliefs, are outputs of biological filters. Your genetics determine temperament, threat sensitivity, novelty tolerance, empathy range, pattern recognition, and so forth. Your environment supplies the information. This is the input. Your brain filters it. What comes out feels like a belief. Another truth we must acknowledge is that most people do not think their way into their beliefs. They feel their way first, and then they rationalize the logic later to avoid cognitive dissonance, i.e., they adjust their beliefs to reduce internal discomfort when facts and reality conflict with their ideology and identity. That's not an insult, that is neuroscience. That's evolutionary psychology. That's called cognitive bias. For most of human history, overthinking got you killed. You didn't sit around a campfire debating probability. You saw movement in the bushes and you said, "Oh crap, it's a lion, run." If you didn't run and you ignored that lion in the bush, you were dead. Dead people don't breed. And that lackadaisical gene died and did not carry on to the next generation. So our brains evolved to jump to conclusions, even if there was no lion in that bush. To trust the tribe, even when they were wrong. Great for surviving predators, not always great for understanding reality. We evolved brains to protect status, avoid embarrassment, and conserve mental energy. You are not seeing the world as it is. What you're seeing is a filtered simulation built by your brain, and most people don't even know it. Your brain did not evolve to find the truth. It evolved to keep you alive inside of a tribe. These cognitive biases are predictable distortions in perception. They're biological features, and these biases come in many flavors. Do not underestimate the magnitude and impact of these cognitive biases on the average person. It's not a small influence. This is not a little slant. This is a full-blown perceptual overlay. Your brain is editing reality in real time, like Instagram filters, for your worldview. Two people watch the same event and see two different worlds, different villains, different heroes, different causes, different solutions. Not because one is lying, but because both are biased. That's why even seemingly smart people believe dumb things. And the modern world is engineered to exploit every shortcut in your brain and shape your beliefs. This is also why facts don't change minds. This is why debates go nowhere. Most people live inside a story, and that story says, my side is right, my sources are honest, my beliefs are moral, my opponents are dangerous. That story feels real. It feels obvious. It feels self-evident. But it is constructed by biology, by algorithms, by fears, and by incentives. In a way, people don't hold their beliefs hold them. More often than not, when you're arguing with somebody, you're not arguing with opinions. You're arguing with identity defense systems, with emotional survival circuits, with social status calculations. That's what you're up against. Because I've debated and argued with so many people over my lifetime, I have seen this reaction firsthand when their perceptions of reality and beliefs are challenged. It doesn't matter how polite you are in presenting the information that destroys their beliefs. The result can be ugly. And here's the hard truth you're going to have to accept. You are not immune. Neither am I. And intelligence doesn't remove bias. But I do think it helps you because it allows you to be more open-minded. To think freely, you have to do something most people never learn. You have to separate yourself from your ideas. And that sounds simple, but it isn't. It requires cognitive discipline, the willingness to interrogate your own mind, to audit your own reactions. It means asking questions like, what evidence would actually change my mind? Am I defending the truth or defending my tribe? Am I reacting to data or to emotion? Am I protecting reality or my ego? Most people never ask these questions because the answers are dangerous. They threaten friendships, reputation, status, identity. So, people choose safety over accuracy, belonging over truth, comfort over clarity. And this is happening at a subconscious level. Look, a free society doesn't collapse from bad leaders. It collapses from unfree minds. Minds that can't update, that can't question, that can't detach, that can't stand alone. Real independence isn't political, it's psychological. So when you look at modern politics, what you're really seeing is millions of primate brains running ancient software inside a hyper-modern media environment being optimized for outrage, loyalty, and fear, and mistaking that for reality. My fellow Americans, it is time you started seeking mental independence. Ask the hard questions. Be open-minded. Understand all the arguments. That's the real crisis. Not left, not right, not populism. Human nature unexamined. And it's tough because it's not a free-floating choice. It's constrained cognition, which means your ability to think freely and accurately is limited. Now, having said that, that doesn't excuse behavior. And the reason it doesn't excuse behavior is because we are products of evolution, shaped by selection, filtered by environment, trained by incentives. Every instinct you have, fairness, jealousy, pride, resentment, loyalty, revenge, so forth, was forged long before modern society existed. They are biologically driven, genetically constrained, deterministic reactions. Our ancestors didn't survive by being nice. They survived by being cooperative when cooperation worked, ruthless when it didn't, fair when fairness paid, and vengeful when betrayed. That's human nature. That's adaptation. Morality and our biological sense of justice didn't fall from the sky. It evolved. Before courts, before constitutions, before governments, there was justice. Primitive justice. If you stole from the tribe, there were consequences. If you betrayed trust, there were consequences. If you attacked somebody, there were consequences. And if there weren't consequences, cheaters multiplied, trust collapsed, groups died. Natural selection kicked in, and you became extinct. So, over time, humans evolved psychological systems for cheater detection, proportional retaliation, fairness tracking, and reputation monitoring. Justice is not a social invention. It's a survival mechanism rooted in our DNA, our human nature. That's why injustice feels physical. Your body reacts, your gut reacts, your brain reacts, because it's wired to. And the clowns that claim there's no such thing as morality ignore this truth. And this is also the reason, to get the point across in Chapter 1, that I started with the simple notion that an isolated man can do no wrong. If you're alone on an island, no one to harm, no one to deceive, no one to steal from, there's no moral violation possible. There's no one else to harm. And by default, no biological justice triggers get activated. Morality only comes into play when there's interaction. Right and wrong are not arbitrary cosmic rules. They're biological relational constraints that govern behavior between humans. That's why justice evolved only in social species. And that's why morality is meaningless without consent, boundaries, and reciprocity. If there's no interaction, there's no moral crime, period. And we've also learned that from that biology comes something profound, natural rights. Not granted by governments, not approved by committees. It is natural. That is to say, it is innate. It is inalienable. It's part of us. I would think that this premise should be undebatable. At a basic level, regardless of race, sex, religion, sexual preference, or ideology, that everybody has a natural right to be left alone. That we are not slaves, regardless of what the collectivists would have you believe. And that we have a moral right to defend ourselves, using lethal force if necessary to defend our natural rights. Is that so hard to understand? If we can't get along, then we leave each other alone. If you want to be a slave, that's your choice. You want me to be a slave? Be prepared to take a bullet to the head. Everyone is entitled to their natural rights of life, liberty, property, privacy, and parenting. Just as I respect that you own your body, your labor, your choices, and the consequences, you must respect my sole jurisdiction over my body, my labor, my choices, as long as the consequences do not impact your natural rights. These natural rights establish the basic boundary lines for morality. Why? Because we are social animals, and without those moral boundaries, holy hell breaks out, cooperation collapses, societies rot, and natural selection, cultural selection, kicks in. Natural rights are the moral fence line. Cross it, now biological justice is triggered and retaliation becomes morally justified. And as we've discussed, there's only one way to cross that line, and that's by coercion, by force. And there's only one way to interact morally, and that's by honest consent. We also discussed how game theory validated natural selection and this evolutionary psychology. Across history, across cultures, across species, one survival strategy dominated, and that was tit for tat. Cooperate through consent first, reciprocate cooperation and altruism, punish betrayal and coercion, and forgive when corrected. It's not ideological, it's mathematical. Groups that punished defectors survived. Groups that tolerated parasites collapsed. Retribution is not barbaric, it's stabilizing. It teaches actions have consequences. You're allowed to think anything. It doesn't matter how ridiculous your beliefs are, or how flawed your moral compass might be. You're allowed to feel anything. What matters is behavior, action. And this led us to one of the most important principles in this entire series, and that is humans must be judged as black boxes. We cannot see intentions, internal narratives playing out in someone's head, emotional justifications, or the subconscious drives. It doesn't matter why we are the way we are. Maybe we are born psychopaths, born with low IQs, born with predispositions toward pedophilia or predation. Human action at the black box level trumps root causes, always. Free will, no free will, irrelevant. We only observe and are impacted by human outputs, and those outputs are actions. As I've said before, if you turn into the Joker and you come after me and my family, I'm morally justified in turning into Batman or the Punisher. That's not cruelty. That's the only fair system possible in a world of biological variance. If we judge minds, we get tyranny. If we judge actions and outcomes, we get justice. And that is a quick recap of what we've covered so far. Moving forward in this foundational series, we'll be taking a deeper dive into human nature, the evolutionary, biological, and psychological differences between men and women, as well as how and why our system is incentivizing the destructive behavior and what we need to do to fix it. So, let's talk about systems now. Systems are selection machines. Systems don't care what you believe. Systems select. Every system rewards some traits and punishes others. Every system breeds a future population. That's why it's important that we change our legal system to align with our moral framework tied to natural rights. Because systems reward behavior and rewards change behaviors. Because all humans act selfishly as their desires drives their actions. This applies to every act, whether seemingly evil or altruistic. The greater the incentive, the more likely to attract an action. Incentives influence one's desire to act. When a system rewards competence, competence multiplies. When it rewards responsibility, responsibility multiplies. Productivity, productivity multiplies. However, when a system rewards grievance, grievance multiplies. When it rewards dependency, dependency multiplies. When it rewards obedience, obedience multiplies. And we create slaves to the system. These are basic cause and effect concepts driven by incentives. It changes your behavior. It selects you, so to speak. So ask yourself, what kind of society do we want to live in? We can live in a free society that incentivizes and rewards responsibility, innovation, delayed gratification, honesty, competence, and self-discipline. And over time, those traits will multiply, culturally, behaviorally, genetically. Or we can live in a collectivist system that incentivizes and rewards dependency, grievance, compliance, political loyalty, excuse-making, and irresponsibility. And because survival is disconnected from contribution, over time, that's what grows. Not excellence, entitlement, and state-sponsored slavery. Is that what you want? Are we as a nation smart enough to grasp this concept? Now I'm going to say something that I'm sure is going to hurt some feelings. A lot of Americans are not just dumb. They're confidently dumb, and that's the most dangerous kind. They took 2 semesters of Intro into Feelings 101, got a participation trophy in sociology, and now they think they're a modern-day Aristotle with Wi-Fi. They memorized 5 buzzwords, learned how to say systematic in 3 tones of outrage, and suddenly they're morally superior to plumbers, engineers, and farmers. Meanwhile, they don't read, they can't think their way out of a box, they can't change a tire, they can't read a balance sheet, they have never read a real economics book, they can't explain how electricity works, they don't understand human nature, but damn, they've got opinions, loud ones. So here's the delusion. They're not thinking, they're repeating. They're like ideological karaoke machines. Some influencer creates a song, some professor hands out the lyrics, and they just mouth it back with attitude. And every time they do, their little echo chamber validates their ignorant egos. You're so wise, so brave, so informed, so evolved. And their little brains go, oh wow, I must be smart. No, you're just well trained. You're a house pet with a TikTok account. You don't have ideas. You have social justice software updates. Every 6 months, they install a new moral operating system, and the foolish will follow. That's not enlightenment. And look, I'm not saying everybody needs to be a genius, but if you panic when someone disagrees, if you block or insult instead of debating, if you call questions violence, if you call silence violence, you're not educated, you're indoctrinated. You didn't learn how to think, you learned what to think. And they trained you so well, you defend the cage. And now, it's time for another parable, and that is the caged eagle parable. There once was a majestic eagle, taken from its nest as a chick, raised in a golden cage atop a king's palace. It was fed daily, groomed, protected from the wind, the rain, and the hunt. Servants brought it food, admiration, and safety. It never had to lift a talon and struggle. But one day, a new king ascended, one who saw no use for this pampered bird. He ordered the eagle released into the wild. The servants, following the king's order, opened the cage door, and the eagle froze. It didn't fly, it didn't soar, it stared at the sky like a stranger. Its wings were strong, but they were unused. Its instincts buried under layers of ease. It stood on the edge of the cage, intimidated by the horizon, paralyzed by the unknown. Eventually, it got hungry, and that hunger forced it to move. It tried to fly, but its landings were clumsy. It didn't know how to hunt or to survive independently. It tried, but the eagle failed again and again. It grew hungry, cold, desperate. But slowly, painfully, it remembered. The wind became an ally. Each hunt became a lesson. Its wings, a weapon of grace. And after weeks of suffering, it finally soared. Not because of comfort, but because it learned to overcome hardship. And for the first time in its life, it was free. And for the first time, it was truly majestic. The lesson? The caged eagle isn't just a story. It's an example of how a system can alter and influence our nature. Because that eagle, it represents human beings dropped into a system that removed consequences. Let's look at the transition this eagle had to go through. Stage 1. The eagle was raised in a golden cage. It was fed, it was protected, it never had to struggle. Sounds nice, right? But here's what actually happened. It was conditioned. No effort required, no consequences for failure, no reward tied to competence. And when you remove those feedback loops, you don't create excellence. You create learned dependency. The comfort rewires you. As humans, we do this all over the place. Our education systems pass people who didn't master anything. We have jobs where showing up matters more than producing. We have created social environments where status comes from signaling, not from skill. So people walk around thinking they're doing fine, but they've never really been tested against reality. They're living in a bubble. And believe me, with the evolution of artificial intelligence, Americans will be tested. It's coming. Regardless, this is an environmental mismatch. Although the eagle evolved for hunting, risk navigation, and energy optimization through effort, in the parable, it experiences zero-cost resource acquisition. The result is the same for humans in this modern evolutionary mismatched state. Ancestral humans evolved in environments of scarcity and physical risk. Natural selection favored vigilance, skill acquisition, and self-reliance. Today's golden cages, the helicopter parenting, the corporate safety nets, the welfare abundance, remove those pressures. The brain's survival circuits, the amygdala-driven risk assessment, the dopamine seeking for mastery, they atrophy from disuse. Just like your muscles. You don't use them, you lose them. We are seeing way too much of this in our society today. We see it especially with men. Our modern system is wussifying our American men. Mentally and physically. More and more, especially among the Gen Z, we see that men are unprepared for reality and the hardships of life. The instincts of those who were pampered and coddled don't disappear, but they do go dormant. Neural pathways for survival behaviors weaken. Then in stage 2, reality shows up, and people freeze. This is the shock to the system, the cognitive paralysis phase, when the cage door opens and the eagle just sits there. The wings work, the body's strong, but it doesn't move. Why? Because it has no model of the real world. Psychologically, it has to overcome the novelty shock and the uncertainty paralysis, the learned helplessness. Again, we see this every day in our human lives. People leave a structured system, a school, a safe career, protected environments, and suddenly they don't know what to do. They hesitate, they blame the system, they stall. That's not always stupidity. It's the evolutionary brain prioritizing error avoidance over action. In other words, they would rather not act than to risk acting incorrectly. This is adaptive because in the wild, reckless movement equaled death. But in a protected safe space environment, the protected lacks mapped instincts to guide action, so it defaults to do nothing. This response is a direct result of a poor system. That's what happens when your brain was never trained to deal with uncertainty, risk, or consequences. When your prediction model fails, the brain doesn't charge forward. It freezes. It triggers the human evolutionary psychologically hardwired freeze component of the fight, flight, freeze system. Many Americans today experience the same identical freeze when suddenly thrust into independence due to, let's say, job loss, empty nest, inheritance cut off, or failure to launch off the freaking couch. Paralysis is not weakness. It's an adaptive first-stage survival mechanism that buys time for the threat appraisal. Yet, in a mismatched modern context, it feels like debilitating anxiety or procrastination. Now, stage 3, pressure forces movement. The eagle didn't fly because it felt inspired. It flew because it got hungry. Incentives flipped from artificial comfort to biological necessity. And that matters, because real growth doesn't start with safe spaces or being pampered. It starts when comfort stops working. Just like the guy in chapter 1 sitting on a rock, there is a reason he decided to move. Every action we take is driven by our desire to be in a better state. So we find that financial pressure forces skill development. Career stagnation forces intervention. A health crisis might force behavioral change. Relationship loss might force self-reflection. That's where there's a psychological shift, where motivation becomes non-negotiable and excuses collapse under pressure. Now, action isn't optional anymore, and suddenly people move. Not because they want to, but because they have to. That's evolutionary wiring. Scarcity is a trigger, not a tragedy. It forces exploration, risk-taking, and learning. This is how evolution reboots behavior. When survival is threatened, dormant systems reactivate, if they still can. Remember, unlike many instinctive creatures, humans are a little bit different. A human prefrontal cortex matures over years. It's one of the last regions of the brain to mature, and its development typically continues until the mid-20s. This region of the brain, the region right behind your forehead, this is the area that's responsible for decision-making, impulse control, long-term planning, risk evaluation, and moral reasoning. Among humans, as a child, your brain has tons of neural connections. Over time, it eliminates weaker and unused connections that you will never get back when your brain is fully matured. So, when you're growing up, skills you use frequently strengthen neural pathways. Skills you ignore weaken or become less efficient. That's why it's so important when we raise our kids that we do it right. Someone who never practices long-term thinking may stay impulsive. Someone who constantly exercises judgment improves it. The principle of experience-dependent wiring absolutely applies to improving psychological skills. Practice discomfort tolerance, you may become more resilient. Practice delayed gratification, you improve long-term thinking. Practice emotional regulation, you gain control over your reactions. However, if someone constantly avoids conflict, risk, failure, and criticism, then those circuits don't get trained, and they do not develop the skills needed to evolve. That's not ideology, that's basic learning and neuroplasticity, and it's in our human nature. This is experience-dependent wiring. It is synaptic pruning. And today, our societal system is not doing the younger generation any favors. Too many Americans today, by the time they get to college or enter young adulthood, they're too scared to even leave their parents' basement, or they need safe spaces so their little feelings don't get hurt. It's sad, really. Anyway, now we get to stage 4, where failure becomes the teacher. Now the eagle finally desires to leave the cage. The desire to be in a better state drives action. The eagle tries to fly. Not surprisingly, it sucks. It crashes, it misses, it fails over and over. But this is good, because for the first time, the feedback is real. No participation trophies, no emotional buffering, just outcome. This phase is the evolutionary equivalent of the trial and error learning loop under acute stress. Psychologically, it feels like hitting rock bottom. You can feel this after the first failed job interviews, a botched business launch, being fired, or dealing with survival struggles after the privilege ends. The desperation is adaptive. It signals the old strategy, dependence, is no longer viable. This is where real growth happens. Development of competent-based confidence. Feedback is now tied to reality, not artificial reward. And we see this in the real world, too. If you live by sales, you close the deal or you don't eat. In business, the market doesn't care how hard you tried. It cares whether or not you executed a successful model. If you live by skills or trades, bad work is visible immediately. In engineering, your design either works or doesn't. This is reality, and this is where people split. Some adapt, some learn to become better. This is where we want our men to be. Others, however, will still try to run back to the comfort systems that protected them from the feedback, from reality, from human nature. I will let you speculate on what type of humans are more likely to choose reality over living in a fantasy bubble. But anyway, finally, the eagle reaches stage 5. Instincts come back online. Basically, something clicks. The eagle starts to see. Wind isn't random, it's a lift. Movement isn't chaos, it's an opportunity. The prey isn't luck, it's pattern recognition. It didn't become something new. It became what it was always genetically designed to be. The same thing happens with people. Psychologically, instincts kick in. Pattern recognition improves, and confidence becomes earned, not given. People start to see reality clearly and operate effectively within it. You see this transformation all the time. When someone becomes financially disciplined after years of waste, a previous passive person developing assertiveness and boundaries, a professional who shifts from checking boxes to actually solving problems, a man who becomes protective, decisive, and responsible after becoming a father. That's not transformation, that's reactivation. The instincts were never gone, they were just suppressed. And then comes real freedom. Eventually, the eagle soars, not because it was made safe, but because it became competent. That's freedom. The ability to operate in reality without needing to be shielded from it. And that's what we want. Americans who are no longer dependent on artificial systems to function. Individuals who develop marketable skills, financial independence or margin, and strong boundaries and decision-making ability. We want leaders to learn to make decisions under uncertainty, accept the consequences without deflection. We need Americans to learn to become calm under pressure, have a low need for external validation, working in the realm of high accountability, start operating at full human capacity, competence, autonomy, adaptability. This is the activation of peak adaptive functioning. In evolutionary psychology terms, this parable is a cautionary tale about suppressing adaptive instincts through artificial safety. The golden cage created a profound mismatch between the eagle's evolved psychology and its environment. Too many Americans today remain in phase 1 or 2 because the short-term pain of phase 3 feels evolutionarily wrong. Yet the parable and the science show that only through pain does that brain rediscover its ancient wings. In layman's terms, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And those who never push themselves or take risks, they will become weaker. And now, it's time for another parable. The Wild Pigs and the Fence. This is a parable about power, incentives, and the collectivist trap. So there once was a clever trapper who wanted to catch a herd of wild pigs. Not by force, but by design. He didn't chase them, he didn't cage them. He simply laid out a pile of sweet corn in a clearing. At first, the pigs were suspicious, but their hunger has a short memory. One by one, they came, they fed, and nothing bad happened. So they came back, again and again. After a few weeks, the trapper built a single wooden wall off to the side. At first, the pigs found that wall to be suspicious, but the corn stayed, so they did too. And slowly again they started to feed, and nothing bad happened, so they came back, again and again. Soon, the trapper built a second wall, and again, nothing happened, and they came back, then a third. Until finally, the only thing that was left was a narrow opening where the pigs entered, fat, complacent, and docile. When the fourth wall went up, the pigs didn't even run. They'd forgotten how. The gate slammed shut, and that was that. Now, what exactly did the trapper do? He understood incentives. He didn't coerce the pigs. He didn't fight them. He aligned their short-term desires with his long-term plan. He incentivized their own dependence. And once they were comfortable, once the free corn rewired their instincts, they weren't wild anymore. They were prisoners, pets, property. That's how collectivism works. It offers you comfort, free stuff. It incentivizes reliance. It numbs the instincts that made you sovereign in the first place. Initiative, risk, territorial defense, and self-reliance. And here's the danger. The trap doesn't look like a trap. It looks like safety, fairness, security, equity. And the dumber you are, the lower your IQ and critical thinking, the more susceptible you are and the more likely you are to take that bait. By the time you notice that fourth wall, you've already traded in your natural rights for corn. You've lost your liberties and become a speech-regulated slave to the state. This biological hook works on humans too. Humans, like pigs, evolved in a world of scarcity, where cooperation was earned and survival required vigilance. The world trained us to respond to incentives. It also trained us to be cautious when something seemed too easy. But our modern collectivist systems hack those instincts and hijack vulnerable and fragile minds. They remove the struggle. They promise reward without cost. And for a while, it feels like progress. Until you realize the fences are up and you no longer know how to live without the corn. You can't speak freely, you can't move freely, you can't earn freely because you traded freedom for comfort. And now that comfort is conditional. Look, every collectivist system makes the same promise. We'll take care of you. But what it actually delivers is you must obey us. When the state controls resources, it controls survival. When it controls survival, it controls speech. When it controls speech, it controls thought. That's not conspiracy, that is structure. And you can't vote your way out of biology. And today, we are collectively, as a society, we are choosing our own demise. And it is my opinion, of all the countries to fail, should the United States fall, the world as we know it will cease to exist. Liberty will cease to exist, and individual rights will cease to exist. In its place, we will get poverty, depravity, hate, resentment, and for all intents and purposes, slavery. It doesn't have to be this way. Now, you may be asking yourself, what the hell does this have to do with morality and justice? A lot, because this isn't just about survival. This is about how humans develop a sense of right and wrong. It's about how systems influence that development. It's about how systems incentivize behavior, good and bad. And it's about how systems enable or deter one's pursuit of happiness. Moving forward, we're going to take a deeper dive into our human nature in the context of how we react and change due to different environments, or more accurately stated, different systems. And these systems shape what kind of adults we become, our ability to pursue happiness, to grow and evolve our quality of life, or to sink into societal despair. The system we live in impacts our desire and ability to mate and reproduce. It acts like a filtering mechanism. Case in point, America itself. It started with incentives. It started as a filter. Think about what it took to get here in the 1600s and 1700s. You weren't booking a comfortable flight. You were getting on a wooden ship, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean with disease, storms, starvation, and a very real chance that you were never going to make it. Immigration wasn't random. It was a response to incentives. Change the incentives, you change who comes, why they come, and why they do what they do when they get here. The incentive was simple. If you survive, you can build something of yourself. That's it. Unlike today, there was no safety net, and survival was not guaranteed. There was no free rides, no option to live in your parents' basement, screwing off, doing nothing, riding off your neighbor's tax dollars. We did not give these immigrants cell phones. There were no safe spaces. So, who showed up? People willing to bet on themselves. People with a future vision. People okay with delayed reward. People who say, I'll take the risk for the upside. That's upside-driven selection. People didn't come to America because it was safe. They came because it was one of the only places on earth where rules allowed you to change your fate. Because the expected upside outweighed the risk. The environment or the system incentivized a certain type of people to come. That's not just random migration. That's selection pressure. And that system selected or attracted risk takers, builders, people with high agency, intelligence, and clever individuals. The people who came here weren't average. They were courageous, willing to bet on themselves. That's entrepreneurial DNA before we even had the word. You don't cross an ocean into the unknown unless you believe I can build something better than what I'm leaving. That belief, right or wrong, is the engine of innovation. And here's the key. America didn't just attract those people, it rewarded them. It was the system, the environment that said, you take the risk, you keep the upside. You build it, you own it. You fail, you try again. That's cultural selection aligned with human nature. It created a feedback loop. Risk takers came, the system rewarded them. Then more risk takers came, and the system scaled. That's how you go from colonies to the most economically dominant country in history in a few generations. It wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was a system aligned with human nature that rewarded the exact traits required to build something out of nothing. Was it perfect? No. But from a moral evolution perspective, a country formed from the desire to preserve our individual, inalienable, and natural rights was truly a great and revolutionary leap for mankind. Let's step back real quick. There are two forces shaping everything you see around you: natural selection and cultural selection. Natural selection is the engine of biological evolution, first formalized by Charles Darwin. Over hundreds of thousands of years, it evolved or built a brain that tracks fairness, detects cheaters, rewards cooperation, and punishes betrayal. Not because it's nice, but because it works. The environment selects which traits survive. Those traits get passed on through reproduction. Groups that got this right survived. Groups that didn't, they got wiped out or absorbed. That's math. That's natural selection. Natural selection is slow. It takes generations, hundreds of thousands of years. It's unconscious. There's no intent. There's no awareness. It has hard constraints. Biology sets limits. You can't decide to evolve wings. Cultural selection, on the other hand, is the filtering of humans based on culture, ideas, behaviors, norms, and systems. It acts on beliefs such as religion or politics, norms to include manners and laws, technologies, strategies such as cooperation, punishment, or trust. In cultural selection, ideas spread through imitation, teaching, media. Useful or compelling ideas get copied, bad ideas die out. Well, unless sometimes the incentives are skewed. Cultural selection acts fast because cultures evolve fast. You can rewrite norms in a decade. You can reshape institutions in a generation. You're not waiting around 10,000 years for a gene mutation. You just change the rules of the game. It's partly conscious in that humans choose to do this. They imitate, they enforce. Cultural selection is also malleable or flexible. You can adopt or reject ideas quickly. A better business strategy spreads across companies within a decade. But what happens when a culture starts pretending our human nature is irrelevant? When it says, fairness is whatever we define it to be. Outcomes matter more than incentives. You can remove consequences and still get cooperation. Well, you get a shit show. It cannot be done. Not without force, tyranny, or enslavement of some degree. Because under all that cultural pressure, the genetic hardware is still running. Humans still respond to incentives, to punishment, to reputation, to reciprocity. You can try to ignore that, but the system won't. And this is where too many Americans fail to understand reality. They judge systems by intentions. Is it compassionate? Is it inclusive? Does it feel fair? This is the horseshit metric. Systems are judged by what they produce, repeatedly. If your system rewards bad behavior, you get more of it. If it punishes responsibility, you get less of it. If it protects cheaters, you get more cheaters. You get more freeloaders. That's not opinion. That is selection pressure. The same logic that shaped wolves, tribes, and markets is shaping our society right now. We are seeing an unprecedented push today for these collectivist programs. Marxism, socialism, socialist democracy, communism, etc. We're seeing a rise of ignorance, a decline in IQ and critical thinking, a decline in the application of logic, and a decline in morality based on individual and natural rights. We are seeing a disregard for biological and genetic drivers and incentives. And when we compare the parable of the wild pigs and the fence to the modern-day examples of power, incentives, and the collectivist trap, there's one major difference that stands out, in my mind anyway, and that is the strategic nature of the clever trapper. I will assert that the leaders of this collectivist, socialist, and progressive agendas today are not clever or strategic like the trapper. They are more comparable to the fat and ignorant pigs or the pampered eagle who have become accustomed to relying on the government or system to take care of them. They don't know any better. They lack the deeper understanding of the unintended consequences of establishing freeloading incentives. They are responsible for the decline in economic prosperity and the destruction of the quality of life for all Americans. So, moving forward, we're looking into different systems, ideologies, and cultural perspectives, and we're evaluating them in relation to our genetics, our sex, and our human nature. Our system is broken. We have a problem, and that problem is dire. And by dire, I mean existential. And I mean that literally. An extinction event. It's coming, and by the end of the series, I think you're going to agree. So, again, on that note, peace out from Virginia.